Matt asked me to come back and kind of go over this one more time, probably not as lengthy or as in-depth as we did last time. We had a lot to cover last time. So he requested that we bring Liz back. So for those of you who've not met Elizabeth Gross, this is Elizabeth Gross, and she's the consultant that the city has worked with since 2009. So I have handouts, so we're going to try to stick to the agenda and try not to go off. The priority today, for me anyway, and for Christine, for those of you who haven't met Christine, Christine's the HR generalist in HR, so is to put before you again the recommended pay grade changes for all civilian employees. Then we have the seasonal pay grade, and then we have
we call it the new entry
level for some of these looming outlier people that don't really work seasonally, but they're part-time. So I will go ahead and pass out the agenda. We have kind of come up with, and Liz can kind of go ahead and start something.
And Ms. Gross, if you would speak at the microphone.
Oh, yeah, because I'm recording. I'm sorry. Okay. Yeah. I don't mind. Because I have trouble hearing, so I may have to step forward to hear any questions. Well, while Kim's handing out the agenda, let me introduce myself to those of you who I've not met. My name's Liz Gross, and I've been working with the city of Jeffersonville since 2009. Just very briefly, as you're looking at your agenda, as we're calling it, or points of topic, on a history standpoint, I got involved with the city back in 2009 because at that time the mayor was interested in what he called performance management. I'll make this really quick, but kind of bring you up to date. Performance management, which would allow a more structured approach to evaluating employees, and in theory then being able to pay them based on their performance. Well, in order to do that, a number of things had to happen. So during the course from 2009 through current, we started out initially with new job descriptions for all employees, because that needed to be in place. And we also identified the need to do a compensation market survey, because you can't have performance management if you don't know how your people are paid. And you may not be aware, those of you who have been here on the council for a while are, prior to these pay grade system, the employees are paid based on the ordinance. It was just a straight set of pay. So someone who left the organization making $40,000 a year, they replaced that position, they paid the incumbent at $40,000 a year. There was no structure involved. So part of what I helped the city do was put in the comp plan after doing the market survey. So during the time since then, we've tried to keep the comp plan up to date. We put in a policy administration or salary administration to help manage that plan, as well as a performance management policy. I think from a significant standpoint, the policies initially was set up that every 2 years we'd evaluate what the compensation pay grades and pay ranges were for the city. In order to keep it current, there was a decision made back, I believe, in 2012 to defer the every 2 years to as needed. So effectively, since 2012, there has not been, and this is what's important, there has not been a change in your pay grades and pay ranges from a market standpoint. So they haven't been adjusted since then. As a result, there's been some difficulty in the hiring process because pay has not kept up with the market, and some internal compression issues we'll talk about. Additionally, and it's on the small side, there was a short term where there was pay range freezes for employees for new hires, which again resulted in some internal compression, what we call internal equity issues. The other part of the comp plan that hadn't been addressed in the past as well were these, we'll call them outlier positions, which were the seasonal jobs, primarily in parks, but not all parks, seasonal jobs, and what we initially called, I believe, your last meeting, they called part-time jobs because they're primarily part-time. But for the purpose of this meeting and ongoing, we're changing it to entry-level pay grids, and I'll explain why. Because it's not necessarily part-time jobs. It could incorporate people working full-time in an entry-level job. These, again, were outliers, not in the existing pay grade system. They were just kind of hanging out there, and what we're trying to do is get all positions with the city pulled into a structure. So, without further ado, what my recommendations moving forward were Number one, and I believe you've seen this, was to adopt and approve and utilize a seasonal workers pay grid. The seasonal workers pay grid, the change you'll see there is the base pay rate is at $8.50 per hour. In the past, it had been $7.25, which is the current federal minimum wage. The concern here is, as most of you are probably aware if you've been following the news at all, is there's been a big push and a trend towards minimum wage moving up. City of Louisville's already taken steps to do that, and I believe some of the cities here in Indiana, you mentioned Clarksville and such, have already passed ordinances to raise their minimum wage. So it's a need to be competitive and also to be aware that this is where the trend is going. Louisville currently is at $8, and by next year it'll be at $9 for the minimum wage. So,
$8.50 in July.
yes,
$8.50.
$8.50 in July and then $9 next year. So in accordance of, rather than continuing to make changes, that let's recommend going to $8.50 as your base pay rate for the entry-level positions. For the seasonal, sorry.
I'll try to speak loud. Clarksville, do they do it just for the city employees or for the entire city?
For their seasonal, now they're
Just for their
closed.
City work, town workers.
Their aquatic center is being closed, but I know Paul's here for support as well to kind of answer any questions, since most of these affect his employees in this department. But they're paying their camp counselors and their seasonal staff $9 this summer.
But they just raised the minimum for their employees, not for all employers in the town, is I think what the question was.
Yeah, I'm just talking about seasonal. We're only comparing like their entry level and seasonal.
For competitive cities, yes. And you're looking on a national basis, the trend is coming, it will come, and it certainly is happening already across the river in Kentucky with Louisville, and the city of Louisville moving their minimum wage level jobs. So 850 is, and again, the whole idea is we want the seasonal workers in a pay structure, because what was happening before, there wasn't really structure. When people got hired, it was not clear how the pay rate was determined, or when someone came back was rehired, what was the process, sometimes good, sometimes just a question. So this way, by having a pay grid, there's no question. This is where we're going to bring people in hired with no experience. This is where we'll bring them in when they've had 1 or 2 years experience and when they're rehired. So it's very fair and equitable and understandable. It brings control over your pay structure for your seasonal folks, because you've got quite a number of people in the seasonal positions, probably close to, I think, over 100, 150.
We had about 100 last year, 80 in the pool.
So it's a significant number of people they have out there and not in some type of a formal structure. So the seasonal pay grid, it was requested by the Parks Director and supported by the Parks Director and Human Resources, the recommendation. Basically, standardizing pay practices for the seasonal workers, providing a basis for new hire and returning seasonal staff that's equitable, functional, defensible, and externally competitive. And as a part of that project, job descriptions were developed for all those positions. Prior were not job descriptions for those seasonal jobs. Any questions about the seasonal pay grid? All right, without questions, I'll move on then to, and we did, not to confuse you, we did change the name, but it seemed to make more sense for the long run. What I believe was called the part-time pay grid, we renamed to the entry-level pay grades. And what these positions are, again, they're outliers. They don't fit nicely into your current pay grade system because they really are very entry-level, low-skill positions. Their pay rates fall below your current base, which is around 11.25. So we found is that we needed to do something with the outlier jobs. So we gathered up all those outlier jobs, which primarily are part-time, though we didn't want to call it part-time because you could, in theory, hire somebody full-time, maybe on a short-term basis, that would be in this category of entry-level jobs. And for example, we've got the monitors in the field house, and this would be monitors in the field house, and then we talked about some clerical administrative positions that might be like a file clerk being hired, and maintenance workers that are hired during the summer that are picking up trash or mowing lawns. they were falling below your pay grids, your existing 1 through 10 pay grids.
Question. With the entry-level positions then, those positions aren't compensated or increased per year. That would fall into the ranges that are increased 3% in our budgets.
It's a good question.
Based
Yes.
on their evaluations.
Because they are actual regular, what we in HR call regular employees,
Seasonal.
rather than seasonal, so they would fall under the guidelines in your policy administration for your regular employees. So we would hope that they would be reviewed on an annual basis, and if raises justified, then that would be part of the process.
And these are also people who have historically been paid on claims, or people who've been paid in areas that before we had BSNA and Kronos, really, I'm not real sure how they always got paid, or they were kind of like, we call them outliers, that's what we refer to them in HR, as the outliers, and we've done a really good job. We've met with Paul. I think Paul gets sick of talking to us for probably a year now, trying to get our arms around all these folks and every employee, and what do they do, and how many hours do they work, and what exactly are the expectations when they come to work, and working diligently with Heather, and prior to that, Amy was trying to assign them GL numbers so that eventually, I think the goal for everyone is to be able to establish some costs around each of these employees in terms of, from a budgetary standpoint, what are we spending, what are we, what's the revenue, what are they doing, and trying to get them classified appropriately.
Yes, it's difficult to draw upon budget numbers when you don't have the employees placed in a particular pay grade or bracket. Okay, so on the entry-level pay grades, A and B, and again, it coordinates with seasonal. Those of you who are paying attention probably noticed that the base rate, again, is $850 for what we're calling, to keep it from being confused with your 1 through 10 pay grades, we're calling it entry-level A pay grade and entry-level B pay grade, and a slight difference in pay between those pay grades. Again, it's a general clerical, field house monitors, Ken Ellis monitor, maintenance one, and your sanitation worker, the individual who I believe cleans the restrooms, etc. And then at level 2, Paul had mentioned that he's got individuals in the help and that actually mow lawns and such, that he wanted to distinguish they have a higher level of skill than those just picking up trash, which would be the maintenance level 1 positions. And again, the same thing was done for these positions, where there were not job descriptions. Job descriptions were developed for these positions, so we can, and also review forms, so these employees can be part of the review process. Any questions about what we're calling the entry level?
I do. When I'm going backwards to the seasonal. We have, like for our lifeguards, as an example, if we have a 5th-year lifeguard, are we going to say that person is a level 5 lifeguard, they're going to make $11.96 per hour, whereas last year where they would have just made probably a base of $7.25 or less, or maybe a little bit more?
Lifeguards were already, I believe their base pay was $9 an hour last year at the very bottom.
So do we have a number of lifeguards that we're going to be increasing from that $9.50 based on these changes? Or were those raised?
About the same.
Were they raised? So if I've been a lifeguard for 4 years, I've already had an increase? Is that?
For the most part, because they typically are paid more to begin with, because there are certain requirements that they have to bring to the job.
Uh-huh.
They've always been paid.
Yeah, from a market standpoint, lifeguards are going to be paid more than your concession admission workers
Right.
because of the nature of their work.
I understand that.
Okay.
Maybe I'm not articulating. If I'm coming back for my 5th season as a lifeguard, was I already receiving, and maybe this is a question for Paul, was I already receiving increases every year because I was a return employee?
Yes.
Okay.
And part of it,
Not the percentage like a...
Sure.
yes, and it was, I think last year they implemented the initial pay grid, so that was used last year to some success. It wasn't fully implemented, the pay grid, but prior to that, there was a little bit of this ad hoc on what they got when they came back. This way, it takes the question out of it, this is
Very
what you'll get
structured.
paid, very structured.
So I'm not coming in after making the minimum for 4 years, and all of a sudden my 5th year I'm
No.
making
No, and then actually, this pay grid also takes into account the rising cost, the value of these jobs in the marketplace, especially lifeguards. That's a tough position generally to
So
fill.
on the flip side of that, is there anyone that's going to be making less money than they would have? Is there anyone who's going to be making less because they're moving to this chart system?
There may be a couple, but typically we've never decreased anyone's pay.
The policy has been to look at if there's someone affected and to look at their pay, and generally speaking, the city has left them in that pay. They may not get an increase then
So
because
then
they're
they have to
already
wait
above, but
if they are above, then they're waiting for their
the next
chart to catch up to them.
chart to catch up. Very good,
We
yes.
also have a really large group of lifeguards moving on this year that are not returning. That happens about 5, 6 years, it seems like, because a lot of the, say kids, but a lot of the hires we have seasonally are high school students that typically stay through college, and then typically by the time they graduate college, they move on. And we have a pretty large group moving out. Christine manages all the seasonal hires. We've got a big group moving out this year, which will help.
It may be too early. I don't know how far along the process is to get these seasonal people put in place for the summer, where I imagine the largest part of our seasonal employees are here.
Christina's spending the month of March with all the seasonal hires. Appointments are already scheduled.
Okay, so we don't have any kind of data to show what this change is what impact this change will have on the budget?
We
Is it
can
too
give you
early
an
for that?
estimate. We have that. We didn't, I had asked Kim, I said, let's not confuse them too much handing out the numbers, but we are prepared to answer that. And what we did, again, it's an estimate because we can't tell exactly
Right.
who's going to come back or what have you. So what we
Right.
did for simplicity is said, if the numbers looked exactly like they did this year in terms of the bodies or incumbents in those positions, here's an estimate. So grain of salt, ballpark figure, based on the numbers we had of like the number of first-year people in the Category 1 pay level was 17, second year 15, et cetera, as you go through the chart, based on the new pay rates, what those costs would be. And the overall cost, again, an estimate, ballpark, was approximately $232,000. If we use the $7.25 per hour as a base, which is the current base, it would have been about $298,000, so it's about $34,000 difference in additional funds to move to the 850 base, long and short of it, based on these numbers.
So we're looking at about a $34,000 net increase.
Net increased estimate.
Estimated.
Estimate. And again, as Kim said, if the result is you actually have more senior people leaving and new ones come in, it could be a wash.
And then we're also implementing the shallow water guard. I think one of the things that Paul and Nikki and Christine and Heather and I and Liz have worked with is for the shallow water pool, instead of hiring a full-time guard at a higher rate, you'll notice on the former sheet that we gave you, we're going to implement a shallow water guard. So I believe there's going to be approximately 4 to 5 guards working in the shallow water, and they won't have the same certifications and the same requirements as the other lifeguards. They will be paid less. So that will also be a significant savings over prior years.
Now, they're going to be paid less returning, or are they going to stay the
different
same
pay
and
grade.
be caught up?
They'll be in a different pay grade, so your full lifeguards, which is a more certified position, will be what we're calling pay level 3. Those individuals will be in pay level 2, so they're in a different grade.
Different certification.
Excuse me,
Go ahead.
Matt. And Nikki intends for all new lifeguards to be a shallow lifeguard before they move into a lifeguard. So it's not like they were a lifeguard last year making $12 an hour, and now they're going to shallow making $10.50 an
Okay,
hour.
that was
It'll be
my
all new. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. So any questions about what we're calling, I guess that was a seasonal, or any questions on the entry-level pay grade structures?
I guess same question. Do we have an idea of what the impact will be going to the structure on the budget?
Again, it's a ballpark.
Sure.
It's a ballpark. You have that, Kim? I've got one. It's a ballpark. They're primarily field house monitors, and they were making, a number are making minimum wage at 7.25.
Uh-huh.
I had to estimate their hours because they're anywhere from, they're part-time, so it could be 5 hours a week on average, could be 25 or 30 hours a week on average. So I just said 20 hours a week on average for all of them, just to give us a number to work with. So that equates to about $12,000, potentially $12,000 additional to move from a base of 7.25 to a base of $8.50 an hour, given all things are equal, that the same people come back or continue to be employed. And you'll see a number of people are already into the pay rate, so it's primarily those who are at 7.25 that are affected. And the actual dollar amount, I would guess, will probably be less. You just don't have good numbers for the actual hours all these part-time people work. Yeah. So the 20 is just probably a high-end estimate, the 20 hours a week.
Probably none of, you don't have very many people at Field House that work 20, they're working like 5 or 10
Right, they're about
hours.
5 to 15 maximum.
So the number I provided you is on a high-end estimate. Any questions?
I have a question for Paul. How many guards, and this kind of gets down in the weeds or micromanaging, and I was hesitant to ask. I thought I heard Kim say that we have four guards that watch the little, I'll call it the kiddie pool or small pool. How many guards do we have at one time watching that little pool? One?
No, there's 3 watching that pool. There's a total of 11
Paul, would you come up?
positions. I'm sorry?
Would you
Yeah,
come up? Sorry.
It's okay. There's a total of 11 positions in the pool, and they rotate around. So currently, they're all lifeguards. One lifeguard starts at the first position at the top of the slide. Bottom of the slide is 2. On the main pool is 3, 4, 5, 6, and then it goes to the small pool. Then it's a break, and then it's to the small pool, and then it's a break and back up. So currently, they rotate. With this, it'll be 2 rotations. The lifeguards will rotate in 6 or 7 positions, and the kid pool will rotate in 3 or 4 positions. So to answer your question, sorry, at any one time, there's 3 shallow water attendants.
And how big is the shallow water pool? I mean, is it right here?
Maybe as big as this room
Oh, that's
here.
big,
It's pretty
okay.
good size. Probably bigger because there's a play feature right in the middle of it, and then there's enough walking space about the size of this room.
And then that's just 3 feet.
Do we have a policy that parents cannot drop their kids off? If that's the only pool they can get in, are we babysitting the kids all day for the parents, or?
Well, for the most part, yes. I mean, we had an incident in the past where a mother didn't watch her child. He walked right over to the big pool and jumped in, and we saved her, obviously, and everything was fine. But a lot of it is a babysitting service for that play area.
My only comment is when I think of if you have a child that's small enough that they got to be in the wading pool. I'm probably using the wrong terms, but the wading pool. Typically, I would think you'd have the moms all around or the dads all the way around with their kids playing.
Yes.
Yet we got to provide 3 people. When our pool is losing money, we're providing 3 people.
Well, you're exactly right. We're not required to have those shallow water lifeguards. We do it as a service to the city.
Sure. I mean, I don't want us to scrimp on safety, but it just drives me nuts. Like if you bring your child there and you just
We actually, to your
bed you
point,
out.
one of the conversations that we've had, Paul and I have had at length, is actually looking at what would be the possibility of actually closing off, fencing off that part of the pool completely, and actually having signage indicating to your effect that there are no lifeguards available and swim at your own risk, and there must be, yeah, and everything you're going to say right now is everything we've discussed as well, thinking, what do you do and how do you make that decision? And we've not completely felt comfortable with making that recommendation to the council, but we've talked about it. and
It's like the old
ultimately
Ewing
it's your
Lane pool.
decision.
The old Ewing Lane pool had the kid area fenced off, and they put somebody, a monitor right there at the gate, making sure that the little ones didn't wander out of there. But there's no lifeguards in there. The parents just, like you said, sat around the pool.
I have a quick question real quick. mean, is there a policy that we have, that like if children under a certain age must be accompanied by a legal guardian or adult at all times, anything like that? 'Cause I know I've seen schools across the country with policies such as that.
I can't say for sure. We have a set of rules outside and inside, and I feel pretty confident that there's some language in there that says that.
Okay,
Um,
because I think earlier you said sometimes people just drop off these young kids.
No, that doesn't happen.
Oh, okay.
I think Nathan
That's
mentioned
what
that.
was
I
just
never,
from a legal liability standpoint,
Yeah.
you definitely need to have a
There's some
policy.
older kids that get dropped off.
well, yeah, if they're like 13 or older, but yeah, if, no parent's going to drop off a 5-year-old and just let them go in and drive off. They come in with them, they have to be accompanied by an adult. If they're-
I
They
didn't,
just don't always watch them, like Kim said.
I didn't want to derail it. You answered my question, but I'd say if you start getting a pinch on money, that's an area you could cordon it off or something, because, you know, that's, I mean, I don't want to take the responsibility of the parents away.
Trouble with hard to get in.
Right? He's not.
Okay. I had a question about this entry-level pay grades chart. So it looks like you're accounting the impact for just the workers that are under the minimum wage. I'm assuming, or under the, not the minimum wage, I'm sorry, the new proposed $8.50. Are we again, just like we were with seasonal, leaving everyone else that is above that $8.50,
Where they are.
freezing it where they are, and then, or will they be incorporated into 3%?
Actually, I'm sorry, I didn't make that clear.
Sorry.
It's a
I
voluntary.
apologize. It's going to be, forget seasonal for right now. They're handled differently, they're on a grid.
Yes.
This entry level will be handled just like your regular full-time employees that are in the 1 through 10 grid. So they'll have the pay grades and a pay range. So wherever they are in the range, if they're, now the ones at 7 1/4, yes, you would need to bring them up to 8.50, get them to the entry level. Those who are currently in the pay range,
We'll stay
There's
there
no-
for a year, and then,
there's probably no effect with anyone who's currently in the pay range. We could look to see, we're kind of getting ahead, if there's an issue with what we call compression. But right now, your goal would be anybody who's not in the pay range, what I provided is to bring them into the pay range, the minimum. But yes, what if I'm making $9 an hour now, I'm still making $9 an hour, but I may be due for an increase based on my merit and performance, like any other employee.
so that increase isn't counted into the impact. Will that begin in a year, or?
Oh, you mean the impact for the people at the minimum wage?
Well, if we're talking
7
about,
1/4?
if we're talking about the monetary impact of moving to this scale, will the employees that have already worked these jobs for a few years, you know, or they might be eligible, they are now going to be eligible under our existing.
Let me
guidelines?
ask, I will need to ask Paul how often he currently, this group of employees, because they're primarily Parks employees, there may be a few stragglers who aren't, that are, like the monitors are the main group. If they are, do they receive raises every year? Those?
Well, the pool
No, not your-
employees.
not your
Oh,
pool,
the
just your
monitors.
monitors.
Yes, when the council approves raises for regular 40-hour employees, the part-time employees are considered as well.
Okay,
So that doesn't change.
okay.
Yeah.
Right.
They're just now in a pay range along with every other employees in a pay range.
So,
So,
and I'm sorry to keep going back to Paul, but, so those employees have all gotten, in the past, they've received their written evaluations every year, is that right?
Yes.
Okay,
If not, we track them down.
I believe you.
Actually, Paul's good. He gets us.
okay. We're ready to move on to point...
One thing I want to add is, Callie, to your point, the thing that kind of gets confusing is when you talk about the proposed entry, we will probably add that to the regular pay grade, because it does get confusing having it on the seasonal, but just for talking points tonight.
Yes, that's
And
just
for
for
space.
talking points tonight. We put it with the seasonal and part-time together, but that entry-level piece really is part of your 1 through 10 regular employee pay grade. But we just, for the simplicity of talking tonight, we wanted to keep issues separate. Because the next one is, we're moving on to what I'm calling the up-aging, or the recommendation to up-age your current regular employee pay grades, your 1 through 10 pay grades. And I know Kim has introduced this subject earlier, but again, bottom line is these pay grades have not been updated, gone out to market, or increased since 2012. And what a number of companies will do to keep current, or to try to stay current with their pay and their compensation, is one or two things. Generally, you either go out to market, which we've done in the past, and do wage surveys and evaluate all of your benchmark jobs and then make adjustments as needed. Or another solution, which is less expensive and maybe a little easier to manage, is what they call is up-aging. If you're happy with the existing pay grade, you up-age them, which says we're just going to move them a certain percentage point based on a standard measure. And oftentimes, this, like the Social Security Administration's cost of living index, is used as that basis. And that's what I went ahead and did for this. So over the past 4 years, including 2016, which there was no increase, the cumulative total was 1.49% for cost of living. So my recommendation was to help bring the city's pay ranges back into market, is to move the pay ranges 5%, 1.49. So what the sheet that Kim's handed out, I believe you have, is this one, shows the impact of that, and Kim, I believe, shared this with you before. With the up-aging, the people who are affected, and those being who would fall below the new point entry for their wage, there are 23 individual employees as of the date of this information, January 15th, equating to about $22,700 to effectively move those people who would not be in the new pay range to the entry level.
So that would bring them up to their minimum.
It'd bring them up to the minimum.
Of their 5% shift.
Yes, with that 1 point, yes. With the, what we'll call the new pay range, to bring them into the new pay range. Part of your salary administration policy is, should an employee fall outside of that pay range, the city needs to move them as soon as possible, rapidly, into at least the minimum of that pay range. So that would be the impact. In addition to that, and I think pointed out, in the past, there had been a concern that, probably less so because there's very few people affected by that. The current policy for the pay ranges, those who aren't familiar, is to cap, and it's a very important part of the philosophy, is to cap pay. Once an employee reaches the very top of their pay range, their pay is capped until we see a shift in the pay range, or they move into a different pay range, pay grade that may allow them more money. Very standard comp practice. With this, we'll say 5% shift for simplicity, you don't have two individuals who would still be capped. Now, both those individuals are very, very unique situations. One is a 37-year employee in pay grade 1, and one, I believe, is like a 25 or 27-year employee, been in that same job. And that's what you would expect those individuals to be outside their pay range with that many years in the same job. So they would be very close. I think they're probably, even with them being at the top end like that, they're probably, I think, 102 or 103% above the range at this point. So that's really not the issue I'd like to focus on. I know in the past the capped employees say that sometimes is a buzzword. I think if the city should take a look at a concern with employees, is taking a look at individuals within the individual pay ranges and whether they're properly placed within those ranges, what we call compression. And compression means how many people are towards below the midpoint, pushed down to the lower part. And I've been concerned actually since I started working with the city that that's something to look at. It has not been looked at for time and resources and dollars. I think we're at the point now we need to at least look at those numbers. Two things concern me: that we haven't made the shift in the pay ranges, and during that time when new hires were brought in at entry level and then we switched it, it caused some more challenges with individuals with been in the same pay grade, same job, making not as much money as you'd expect them to make during the years they've been in that job. So I don't know if that I don't want to get into a big discussion on compression, but basically we want to look at our people internal. We've looked at the external market, make sure your pay grades are competitive, and that's why I'm recommending that 5% shift. The internal market is how are people paid relative to their peers within their pay grade? Is it appropriately, are they appropriately placed? If I've been here 5 years as a general laborer, am I making what I would expect to be making more money than someone who's been here 2 years? As a simple example. So we can look at those numbers to see if there's a concern. The reason you want to look at that is oftentimes when compression takes place, it can adversely affect protected classifications. So you want to be able to at least look at that and say, no, we didn't inadvertently affect groups that may be in a protected classification. As well as trying to be fair to all your employees, that they're paid appropriately within your budget and your constraints within their pay
I have a
range.
question. If, with the ability for the department head or Kim or the administration to bring in somebody at 25% of the minimum, that ought, right, and that is done, sometimes more than that because they come back, but then that leads to your compression because that leapfrogs them up. But there's a second part of this. And then if those folks that have been there for 5 or 6 years, with the system that we have in place, it's based on your performance. And if you don't perform well, you get no increase. So what I'm thinking, if we bring somebody in, leapfrog them to 25%, and then the people that have been there 5 years, if they're just slugs and are putting in time and don't deserve an increase, according to their supervisor, not me, then that's why it's compressing.
Excellent point. Excellent point.
Okay.
When I said we would need to look at this, I'm not saying the city has a problem. You made an excellent point. I've done just some quick initial analysis to get a ballpark, which would raise a question. So I've seen some places that raise a question. It doesn't mean there's a problem. The question may be, it looks like there may be a problem here, but you're absolutely right. When you come down to you look at the individual employee and say, why are they there? Why are they at 25% of the pay grade when I'd expect them to be at least at 50% based on the years they've been in the job? What's going on with that employee? Is it a performance issue? Or is it a matter of they happened to just fall at the wrong time when different things were going on and the pay's shifting? So each one's an individual. And as I told Kim, I absolutely recommend you never give an increase to an individual who is on a corrective action or the job performance is not up to standard. You don't want to send that message. So when I say we should look at it, it's just to go out and take a look at to see if there is a concern. Doesn't mean the city would need to make any changes, but you need to be aware if there are potentially significant problems with what I call the internal equity, especially in the positions that have a large number of incumbents like general laborers or CDL drivers and what have you. Not so much on the higher end pay grades.
So essentially, if there is that unevenness, there should be a paper trail there. Evaluations, corrective actions.
Yes, I would hope.
And if it's not, then that needs to be addressed.
Then it would be a question. Yes, what I'd say was I tell Kim, I come in and say, here are my questions. When I first put together the comp plan and we went from a no structure into structure, we had all sorts of questions about why people where they were in the pay range. And trust me, there was a story for each one of those. And we won't go into those, but there was a story for each one, what had happened. I'll just give you one brief example.
A documented story.
A documented story, or, yes. There was one quick example. Yes, prior to. There's one example, and this was before there were pay grades in place. An individual was demoted, so went from one pay level and no pay adjustment was made. Well, that's going to throw it off. They're actually going to be higher in their pay grade than I expect them to be. So that's a different problem.
2012, couldn't hire anybody.
Well, and yes, in 2012, you had a little bit when they were bringing everybody in at the minimum, and then you switched it back to the 25%, which I highly recommend. You need that flexibility. But that could have caused some compression between those people who were hired at minimum versus those who were hired with the 25%.
Liz, do you have a recommendation at all on the remaining 2 that are be capped out? I mean, they're employees that have collectively been here 58 years. And I understand they're in the lower tier, or the minimum pay grade 1, and it would make sense that they're capped out. But I just hate, if you have an employee that's a good employee, I just hate for people to be capped out.
Well, my recommendation is, right now, your salary policy clearly says to cap employees, and there's a financial reason for that and a strong compensation philosophy reason to do that. And my personal, I'll say my advice, I believe firmly in sticking to that. If an individual wants additional compensation, you can accomplish that by changing jobs, bringing more value. In these two particular cases, though, however, the city does offer your retention bonus, so both of these individuals are getting an additional $4,000 on top of their base pay, so which would even puts them further out in the total comp individual. So other than whatever the maximum, this is, exactly, it is, but I'm saying they are also, because they've been here, they have that longevity bonus. This is what, if you'd like to revisit that, early on back in 2010 when I initially made recommendations, and we talked about what we called capped employed or red circled employees. I said employers handle it a variety of different ways. At that time, the council and the mayor decided they would freeze and cap. Some companies will put bonuses in place, a one-time bonus. Some companies will offer PTO. Some companies will offer different training dollars. There's different recognition you can offer those individuals if that's the direction you want to go. But currently your salary administration policy, and I'd recommend staying with it, says just cap those individuals. And if you continue to move your pay grid, as I'm suggesting you do, you won't have that capping problem.
Even with the longevity and the additional, I think it's 4,000 that's capped at, added onto their salary, that still leaves them. I mean, they've been at that level for some time, at least since 2012. So they're even with the additional bonus of longevity, there's not been any kind of increase since 2012.
Well, this would be my point. This would be the council deciding or asking us to come back with another recommendation on how you want to address capped employees. And again, I would encourage you to think long and hard before changing that, because it affects everyone. And if you no longer cap employees, you lose a little of your control over your financial payroll. Part of that is helping you maintain your cost on your finance. You have a policy. Policies can be revised and updated, what have you. So if it is the council's wish to revisit that and treat it differently, again, with only 2 employees in that boat, I really, from my opinion, I would want you to focus more on your internal equity and making adjustments and spending dollars on that end than 2 individuals who've been in the same job. And it's good. I'm not saying anything wrong. That's great. They've been able to provide that service. But you've been paying them. They get a good benefit plan, and they have the retention bonus. And there's nothing to keep them from moving to another position and applying for another job to move into another pay grade that could allow them to make more money.
Thank you.
Do you remember, or do you have an idea? In 2012, we made adjustments, and we had a whole list of red circled employees that we brought up, I believe.
You mean the green circle, the one, green is the people below and red are the people above.
I'm sorry, yes, green circle
Green,
employees.
okay, green, yes.
That we brought up to a minimum, and it was a significant dollar amount. Do you remember what that was? Was it? It was more than 100,000, wasn't it?
We had a lot of people that weren't even at the minimum.
Right.
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 Part of this process has been getting people to that entry level, but it was, what's that, $80,000?
I was thinking it was close, yeah. Yeah, so doing this more frequently, every 4 years, or I think it was 2 or 3 years originally
Every
recommended.
2 years was a recommendation, no, yes.
But at least doing it every 4 years like we're doing now is going to help prevent that and keep that.
I would recommend you go with 2, and I really would, because it just compounds the problem the longer you wait to make the adjustments. And I understand, as council members, you have the responsibility to watch the city's dollars. I think it's less expensive and less painful to do it to at least look at it every 2 years. You can always decide not to, or to go with a lesser amount. I was recommending Social Security index, but I also would recommend, if we went that direction, to cap it, so it's no more than a maximum of 2% per year, for example, or 1.5% a year. Because you don't want to have an increase that's greater than your average merit increase.
Right.
You want your pay grades, your merit to move faster than your pay grades.
For the senior council members that were here in 2012, I was going to ask, and it was just brought up, what the motivation was between changing the policy from every 2 years to as needed. Was it an issue, or just something that got added in with everything, or?
In my opinion, and I'll speak for myself, I think the $80,000+ in adjustments was a shot. Like, we couldn't do an $80,000 adjustment every 2 years.
Circuit breakers, remember?
And I think that was, for me, that was just inexperience and not realizing what the implications of waiting so long to do that were.
Plus 4 years ago. The other implications, though, too, part of the problem, and Liz pointed out, and when we were bringing people up to that entry level, there was considerable disparity between gender equity, and there weren't any. I'll just leave it at that. So
That's been solved.
Yes, and part of it is just a painful process, and that was the second most painful. The first was when we very first did, and I think it was like $129,000 to get everybody up to equity. But to Liz's point, I know when I first started working here, we would replace people with whatever the salary ordinance said the dollar amount was, which was really just not practical, and that's not what people typically do. And then when we put out the RFP, and the company that she was working with at the time was awarded that initial contract to come in and look at it, I mean, the disparity was all over the place. I mean, and not knowing relationship issues then, or who kind of knew who, or who was friends with who, or whose brother, uncle, or sister worked here. I mean, you had people working side by side, male, female, minority, protected classes, that you have one person who'd been here for 20 years making $15 an hour, somebody working here for 5 years making more than that. I mean, it was just, the disparity was all over the board. And what we've been doing, and it's taken pretty much since then, and as you can tell, even with all the help with Paul, trying to get our arms around all these parks folks and what they do. It's not an easy task, especially with the department of, Christine and I, and Connie works part-time. So it's been a chore, it's been a challenge, it's been a good experience, but I think, to Liz's point, the more we stay on top of that every 2 years and kind of look at that, I think the better off we're going to be, both internal with the internal equity and from a liability standpoint, in terms of, somebody being able to defend our comp plan. I think that's pretty
Kelly,
key.
I think another piece to the puzzle, because it's not just, this is why we did it, that I recall, but a piece was, when we ask, whenever the city publishes an open position, how many applicants do we get? And if in many cases we get flooded with applicants, and so it's like, well, then it's not necessarily our pay that's an issue at all. We could hold the line and save money maybe, and still have some good applicants. And I don't know if that's the case with the summer help or what, but that was at one point part of it. It's like, if a lot of times companies do this to make sure and keep people, or to get them in the door. And if we weren't having trouble getting them in the door, and because of our benefits are so nice, just ask Miss Butler, we keep them. So that's just another piece to the puzzle.
Well, and I was adding up kind of the first 3 lines here, and I'm at 69,000. So I was wondering if if 4 years ago you were looking at this number of 80,000, and I understood that was a 2-year period that you last evaluated it, but we're looking at another big, catching up.
We didn't have the situation we have that we're in now, to where we need to offer more money to get better qualified, because now there is a whole sea of job opportunities out there we're competing with. And that's where, we're getting good help, but then they're leaving us because they can go right up the street and make, $2
And the
more.
seasonal, I wouldn't get too hung up on that dollar amount because that is
Right, I
a
know those
moving
are
target.
estimates, but-
And that was a very,
Circuit
very
breakers is what had us
inflated
scared to death.
number. Just, we have kids who come in and meet with Christine, and like 2 days later, they found another job working somewhere else, and we're going back to the next person. We already have a
Kids?
waiting list. The seasonal, yeah. So when you look at the seasonal, that's very inflated in terms of the hours. I mean, they're all over the pay, in terms of
So kids
hours
are
worked.
finding better jobs?
Yep.
Tell them about the sun, you.
McDonald's right now, where I live, $8.25 an hour with benefits.
So I think the McDonald's up here is
Part-time with
$8.50.
benefits.
The new one's $8.50.
$8.25 an hour.
The new one,
Yep.
I'm easy.
The new one's
Part-time with
$8.50.
benefits.
And they'll drop
They
you like a
have
bad
to
habit.
keep people, they can't keep good
It's benefits of part-time.
They're doing all kinds of incentives now.
Oh, man.
I was just curious. I didn't mean to,
No, but
like,
Well, I
Well,
think
if you
that's
can-
He's
important,
fine.
and that's why, one reason why we're doing this, right?
yeah, just to evaluate
Because,
that.
I mean,
Are there,
I was a kid a long time ago,
Missed 8.
but you, I'm not much taller, but, you would think that these are the jobs that if they go away to college or whatever, they're banking on these jobs, or even in between high school. But the market is so, I didn't realize the market was so competitive that we're losing.
And it's kind of both. We do have a lot of return. I mean, we have a lot of kids, I say kids, I need to say that, seasonal employees who start with us like out of high school. And I mean, my daughter started here when she was 16 years old, and this is the first summer she's not coming back because basically I said, you've got to get a big girl job. You're graduating from college and you're not working as a lifeguard anymore. So we have a lot of our seasonal employees start typically as 8th graders or freshmen, and typically they come back,
Okay.
year after year. And I think that's part of the other piece too, is not only, it's getting competitive, but it's kind of nice to kind of reward them in some capacity to be able to continue to come back and know that who you can count on and who you can't. And then, Nikki and Paul have internally instituted some internal controls so that you've got a lot of our seasonal hires that start playing games with, doing so many like no shows or calling in sick. They get a disfavorable return letter, so then Christine's notified that they're kind of on the not hire list. They're on the second list of hiring. So Christine already has pretty much all the seasonal letters out to everyone that's going to be returning and already has appointments scheduled for most of those seasonal hires for the summer. So. But we've not told them about any of that, so.
I think we just did. This is recorded, right?
any questions about what up-aging is and what the impact of that would be on the recommendation?
We're not running into any liability with that word, are we? Whenever I see
Oh, no.
aging
We can
and
change it every way. It's
fees,
just, it's a
okay,
company,
okay.
they call it up-aging, it's basic aging.
That's the industry
Charity
word?
and I'm-
Great, sorry.
Okay, all right.
You can call it updating, up-ranging, up-aging's the one that comp people use, so. And I think I've covered all those points a little bit out of order there, but if there are any questions, basically we're looking, move forward with cameras, move forward on approving the seasonal pay grids, what we're calling the new entry pay grids, allowing us to move forward with the up-aging of the current pay grades at the 1.49%, and then making recommendations to move the people who will be below the
Yes.
pay range into the pay range. And then those are the main three ones, and then we'd also like to look at the internal equity question.
But that's a different project for a different
That's a
day.
different project, different time, just throwing that out as, would like to look at that, but would recommend again that the council, how to avoid the issues, simply for way out of line in the market, for the external market and your internal market getting out of whack, is to look at least every 2 years at your comp plan on an external basis. You don't have to make any changes, but look at it, and then you can make a decision based on the information you have at that time, whether it should be included or what amount of change. And I think that's it.
So what I planned on doing was, after this meeting, is, Christine and I have already prepared the new ordinance in anticipation of this moving forward, at least us recommending it to get to the clerk's office for the next council meeting.
When do you anticipate having a more firm estimation of, an exact number? Like, at what point will we?
There's no way with the seasonal kids.
Yeah, I guess just either number, when will the hiring, when do we usually have everyone locked in and we can look at that number?
This would be my question. What I estimated these on the high side for the seasonal
Liz.
elementary to go to get the exact
Microphone.
Back here, microphone.
I estimated these, I tend to estimate on the high side
Mm-hmm.
to go back and get that detail if it exists, and I'm not sure it does, especially on the seasonal pieces. You're looking at over 100 some people to look at individually what the pay is, and then if they're paying me to do that, if you're trying to save money, I would not recommend
Right.
doing that unless, however, though, if that's something you want to look at, but that could be quite a number of hours to pull that level of detail for the seasonal folks.
But the number, the 22.7 on the up-aging impact, that is a firm number.
That's, yes, as of the January 1 date. So if you've hired somebody in February, who happened to be below the pay grade, but then someone else might have left. So I don't know how much, have you had turnover this month? So, so that would be the only thing if you hired any entry-level person this month at the old pay range.
Are there any questions or comments? Things that should change before it's presented?
And we're available if you have any questions between now and then. I can get you Liz's email, or you can send me the
Absolutely.
question, and I can forward it to her. Christine's been very involved in this, as well as Paul, myself. We're pretty much here every day between 8 and 5.
But
So,
appreciate the opportunity to speak and glad to meet the new members.
Thank you.
We should have some fun.
yeah.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
So, I think that's all that was on the agenda for tonight. If there's a motion to
I have
adjourn.
a question before we adjourn, if I
Okay.
could.
Sure.
This is off topic, but I want to do it while we're together. Chili cook-off, Jeff Main Street has a chili cook-off.
Oh,
Apparently in the past, the city council has sponsored a table. I believe it's 8 tickets. He'll give us 9, since we're 9 as a body. Are there thoughts about that? It's not enough time. I think it's this week.
it is. It's Thursday.
Can I say one thing?
Yes.
And I didn't know what was happening, for one thing, but Jay never sends anything to the clerk's office for that in order for us to get that TV off.
Yeah, that's the...
It's always been that way. So whatever you all want to do is fine. We'll just need to get a hold of him and get a flyer. But I do know last year you all did do it.
Mhm.
And even before that you did it. But it was always the last minute.
I'm in support of it.
I mean, this is advertised as a public meeting, so.
So we can talk about it.
You can technically talk, even though it may not be on the agenda, it's still a public meeting. I mean, technically, if you all wanted to vote, you could do a vote at a workshop if you wanted to.
Really?
I make a
Yeah,
motion that we
workshop,
bought,
yeah, we make a motion.
can I make a motion to get a table?
Yeah, how much is it for 9?
Plus one, get
$400?
9 tickets rather.
9 tickets?
I can't second.
No, you can't second it. Come on. We got a second. I first and he second.
Hold on just a second. $400 for 9 tickets?
Yes.
I'm typing it.
When is it, this Thursday?
And Lisa Joe
I think it's Thursday.
Yeah, do you know what time?
and Scott.
I second it.
Nathan hasn't had dinner yet, apparently.
Now, are they gonna have the tickets there for you all to pick up?
I'll send out an email. I'll ask him about it.
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed?
He said he was an aye.
He was
Oh, I
not.
know he was.
Okay,
Right.
put that on record.
Just, yeah,
Unanimous.
yeah.
He's gonna eat. Mr. White, are you sending Mr. LSJ email?
I will.
Okay, would you ask him if he, because I have to have a flyer before I can do it.
Okay. I'll do that.
And just another time.
Was there anything else? Did any other members have comments? Okay,
Motion adjourned.
Second?
we're adjourned.